If you really stop to think about it, we are living through this massive historical paradox right now.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally unprecedented.
Right. Because every single day, you and I are walking around with, supercomputers in our pockets. We've got the James Webb Space Telescope capturing the birth of galaxies from, like, billions of years ago.
The sheer scale of it is incredible.
It is. And we have fMRI scanners that are literally mapping the electrical storms of human thought. I mean, we live in this era of just absolute technological abundance, where we have essentially decoded exactly how the universe operates.
You really have the mechanics down.
Exactly. And here's the paradox. If you look at the collective state of humanity today, we are facing this unprecedented epidemic of anxiety, of isolation, and just this deep, lingering inner emptiness.
Yeah, it truly is the great dilemma of the modern age. I mean, we've successfully mapped the entire human genome, right? But we are still desperately searching for our own significance.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
We've mastered the mechanics of existence, but somewhere along that journey, we seem to have just, misplaced the why.
The why is just gone.
Because for decades, this purely materialist worldview has basically suggested to us that we're just random biochemical accidents, just drifting endlessly in a cold and different universe. And for a lot of people, that assumption just strips the oxygen right out of the human soul. It leaves you feeling completely untethered.
Untethered. That's the perfect word for it. And that feeling of being untethered is exactly what we're exploring today in this deep dive.
Yeah, it's a profound topic.
Because we're going to look at what happens when you take those incredible modern scientific breakthroughs like the astrophysics, the neurology, the geology, and you actually harmonize them with ancient spiritual wisdom.
Which people usually think are complete opposites, right?
Exactly. We're asking this really deep question. Is it possible that empirical science and spiritual meaning aren't actually opposing forces at all?
They absolutely don't have to be. And to really explore this intersection, we're going to look at one of the most fascinating phenomena in human history.
Oh, I am so excited for this part.
It's wild. We're examining a text that emerged from the harsh, totally isolated deserts of the Arabian Peninsula over 1,400 years ago. And what makes this text so compelling, regardless of your personal background or your beliefs, is that it makes these highly specific, really complex claims about the cosmos, about the architecture of the Earth, and even human biology.
Claims that humanity was only able to scientifically verify centuries later, like using tools like deep-sea submarines and electron microscopes.
Right, tools that obviously didn't exist in the 7th century.
No, not at all. And I want to be really clear with you listening right now. Our exploration today is not about dogmatism. We aren't here to, preach or hand you absolute truths.
No, definitely not.
This is really an exercise in profound intellectual curiosity. It's about asking if it's possible that a text like this holds some kind of divine code, where the how of modern science and the why of human meaning just perfectly align.
And to really grasp the scale of that alignment, we have to start at the absolute beginning, like the macrocosmos, the origins of the universe itself.
The Big Bang.
Well, eventually, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you rewind to the early 20th century, up until the 1920s, the overwhelming scientific consensus was actually that the universe was static.
Right, because they were heavily influenced by ancient Greek philosophy.
Exactly. The greatest minds in astronomy basically believed the universe was eternal, that it was unchanging, and had just always existed in its current state.
Which, completely changes once we get the Big Bang theory. The modern understanding that literally everything we know, all matter, all space, started from a single, infinitely dense point that just violently expanded outward.
Precisely. Now, consider the conceptual framework laid out in this 1,400-year-old text. It asks the reader to consider that the heavens and the earth were originally this joined entity, a single, tightly interwoven mass. And the specific Arabic word used there is ratku, which conveys this idea of something being fused or sewn together into an impenetrable unit.
Wow, sewn together.
Yeah. And then the text says they were separated or torn apart. And the word used for that is fatku, which implies a very dynamic, forceful unraveling.
It's striking how closely that mirrors the fundamental concept of the Big Bang. But okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second because we have to be intellectually honest.
Of course.
Couldn't someone sitting in the desert, just staring up at a perfectly clear night sky, couldn't they just look at the stars and make a really lucky intuitive guess that the universe is expanding?
I mean, it's a completely fair question.
Yeah.
But to understand why that's so incredibly unlikely, We have to look at how deeply counterintuitive the expansion of the universe actually is to the human mind.
Okay, how so?
Well, even Albert Einstein, with all his brilliance, initially refused to accept an expanding universe.
Wait, really? Einstein?
Yeah. When his own equations of general relativity showed that the universe had to be dynamic, like either expanding or contracting, he just couldn't accept it. He actually introduced this fabricated mathematical concept called the cosmological constant into his formulas just to force his model to remain static.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he later called it the biggest blunder of his scientific career. It wasn't until Edwin Hubble physically observed the redshift of distant galaxies in 1929 that the scientific community finally accepted the expansion.
That's wild.
But here we have this 7th century text explicitly stating that the heavens were built with power and that it is steadily expanding.
That is just a fascinating historical parallel. And, it connects to something else on a cosmic scale that I find incredibly compelling.
The iron.
Yes, the iron. Think about the device you're listening to us on right now, or even the blood pumping through your veins. We rely completely on iron. But the bizarre thing about iron is that it actually cannot be forged here on Earth, or even anywhere in our solar system.
That's right. The mechanics of stellar nucleosynthesis are just fascinating.
Yeah.
Because to fuse iron atoms together, you need temperatures that reach into the billions of degrees.
Millions.
Yeah. And our sun tops out at maybe 15 million degrees at its core. So iron can only be forged in the hearts of hypermassive stars at the very, very end of their lifespans.
Right.
And here's where the physics gets incredible. The moment a star begins producing iron, that iron absorbs so much energy that it extinguishes the outward pressure of the star. Gravity just takes over instantly, the star collapses in on itself, and detonates in a massive supernova.
Which is just terrifying to think about.
It is, and that explosion scatters the iron across the universe. So the iron deep in the Earth's core, the iron in your blood, it literally traveled here via meteorites bombarding the early Earth.
It literally fell from the sky.
Exactly.
And when you look at this ancient text, there is an entire section dedicated to iron. And what's remarkable is the phrasing it uses. It doesn't say iron was created in the earth or brought forth from the ground. It uses a specific word that translates to sent down.
Sent down, yeah.
It notes that iron, which holds great strength and benefit for humanity, was sent down. It's just this striking alignment with the astrophysical reality that we've only very recently mapped.
And, as we follow that iron down from the vastness of space, we eventually arrive at the fragile little oasis we live on.
The Earth.
Right. And the atmospheric and geological descriptions here are just as profound.
Yeah.
The text describes the sky above us as a protected roof. Now, for thousands of years, a human looking up just saw empty blue air, right? They had no concept of the invisible, multi-layered shield that actually makes life possible.
Because without it, we wouldn't survive a single day.
Not even a day. I mean, you have the magnetosphere, which is a concept we didn't fully grasp until the space age, and that deflects lethal solar winds that would otherwise completely strip away our atmosphere.
Right. Then you have the ozone layer, which is filtering out DNA-destroying ultraviolet radiation. And you have the mesosphere acting as this physical incinerator using friction to burn up millions of meteors every single day before they can even reach the surface.
So it operates exactly as a meticulously engineered protective roof.
Precisely.
But wait, let me push back on something here, because this is where I start to worry a bit about retrospective bias.
Okay, lay on me.
When we talk about the shape of the Earth, right? It's really easy to look back at ancient poetry and kind of squint really hard until it looks like modern science.
Right.
Like, I know the text uses the word kawara to describe the transition of day and night, which means to overlap or to wrap around, like wrapping a turban tightly around a head.
Right, right.
And I've heard people point to another word, which is related to the shape of an ostrich egg, to say the text knew the Earth was an oblate spheroid. But are we just, projecting our modern understanding onto ancient metaphors because we really want them to fit? It's crucial to ask that.
Yeah.
Because confirmation bias is a very real danger when you're interpreting ancient texts. However, we really have to look at the linguistic consistency here.
Okay.
To a 7th century mind, the Earth appeared flat, period. And if you believe the Earth is a flat disk, the transition of light is binary. The sun drops off the edge, and darkness falls like a curtain.
Like a light switch.
Exactly. But the verb kawara specifically implies a continuous rolling gradient wrapping around a spherical object. It's a kinetic, three-dimensional metaphor.
Oh, I see.
And when you combine that with root words relating to an ostrich egg, which, by the way, is not a perfect sphere, but actually bulges in the middle, exactly like the Earth does due to centrifugal force at the equator, you aren't just finding lucky words. You're looking at a coherent framework that deeply challenges the dominant visual perspective of that entire era.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's the underlying mechanism of the metaphor that actually matters. And speaking of hidden mechanisms, let's talk about the very ground we walk on. Because the text consistently describes mountains using a word that means pegs or stakes, like the pegs of a tent.
Yes.
Now, for most of human history, if you looked at a mountain, you just saw a massive pile of rock resting on the surface.
Which was the standard geological assumption until the discovery of isostasy in the 19th century.
Isostasy?
Yeah. Science finally realized that the Earth's crust is actually composed of tectonic plates, and they're floating on this denser, fluid-like layer of rock called the mantle. If a mountain were just resting on top of the crust, its colossal crushing weight would actually break the crust or cause it to tip.
So how does the Earth support something like the Himalayas, then?
Through deep roots. We now know that mountains have these massive subterranean extensions plunging down into the mantle. Sometimes they go 10 to 15 times deeper than the peak you actually see above the clouds. Yeah. And they function mechanically exactly like a tent peg or, the unseen mass of an iceberg. They stabilize the shifting tectonic plates and minimize violent tremors. The text described the hidden biomechanical function of mountains centuries before the invention of seismology.
And there is a deeply human element to that, too, isn't there? Like, if you are a human being searching for meaning, struggling with just the chaotic nature of life, there is something profoundly comforting in the idea that even the most massive, intimidating structures around us have these deep hidden roots designed to bring stability to the whole system.
That is a beautiful synthesis of physical reality and spiritual reassurance. And, we see this same depth literally when the text describes the oceans.
Right. And keep in mind, everyone, this is emerging from a society of desert dwellers. Deep-sea oceanography was totally non-existent.
Exactly. Yet it describes an invisible barrier between colliding seas where they meet but do not transgress.
Which, if you've ever been on a boat near the Strait of Gibraltar, you can actually see what this looks like in real life. The heavy, highly saline water of the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic Ocean, and they don't just instantly mix together.
No, they don't.
There is a literal physical fluid boundary, a halocline, created by surface tension and differences in density. It's amazing.
It is. And the text ventures even deeper into the water than that. It uses a metaphor to describe the mental state of someone trapped in profound spiritual darkness.
Oh, this part is chilling.
It really is. It likens their internal state to being lost in a vast, deep ocean covered by waves, above which are clouds. It describes a darkness so absolute that if you hold out your own hand, you can barely see it.
Which, again, challenges the ancient assumption, because for centuries, people thought the ocean was just a calm, sunlit bowl of water all the way down to the seabed.
They did. But modern oceanography reveals two astonishing facts that perfectly align with this passage. First, the total absorption of light. Water filters light by wavelength. As you descend below 1,000 meters, you enter what's called the aphotic zone.
The aphotic zone.
Yeah. All sunlight is absorbed. It is an absolute ink-black darkness where visual perception fails entirely.
That is terrifying.
And second, we only recently discovered the phenomenon of internal waves because the ocean has different layers of density. Massive waves, sometimes hundreds of meters high, move deep beneath the surface, completely unseen.
So you literally have surface waves above, internal waves below, and absolute darkness.
Precisely.
That transition from the macro, like the oceans and the stars, down to the micro is just incredible. So let's zoom all the way in now. Let's look at the human microcosm, the very beginning of human life.
Embryology.
Yes, because the ancient Greeks, who were basically the scientific heavyweights of the ancient world, they believed in a concept called preformationism.
Yes, and we have to understand why they believed that. Without microscopes, human logic dictated that reproduction was just a matter of scale. They basically assumed a male sperm contained a microscopic, fully formed human being.
A homunculus.
Right, the homunculus. And they thought it simply inflated and grew larger in the womb.
Just blew up like a balloon.
Basically, yeah.
But the developmental sequence laid out in this text is completely different. It describes an early embryonic stage, using a word that carries 3 specific meanings. A blood-sucking creature, something that clings, and a leech.
Which is an incredibly counterintuitive metaphor to use if you believe humans just start out as tiny adults.
Right.
But if you look at a 21-day-old human embryo under an electron microscope, visually its shape is remarkably similar to a leech. And more importantly, functionally, it is implanting or clinging to the uterine wall. Its cardiovascular system is connecting to draw blood and nutrients from the mother, operating biologically exactly like a parasite.
And then it moves to a stage described as a chewed substance, like a piece of gum with teeth marks pressed right into it.
Yeah.
Which aligns perfectly with the 28-day embryo, when the somites, which are these little blocks of tissue that eventually become the spine and muscles, form symmetrically along the back. They look exactly like teeth marks. It really forces you to rethink how ancient people conceptualized our beginnings.
It does. It shows a morphological progression that totally challenges the simplistic assumptions of that time.
And speaking of challenging assumptions, here is something that always puzzled me about ancient anatomy. In the ancient world, the consensus was that the heart or the stomach was the center of thinking, feeling, and decision-making.
Right. Even Aristotle believed the brain was just an organic radiator designed to cool the blood.
Exactly. So in this text, when it is severely warning a specific tyrannical historical figure, it singles out his forehead. It warns that he will be grabbed by his lying, sinful forelock, which is the front of his head. Why condemn the front of the head for a moral failure like lying?
Well, for a long time, critics assumed this was just a bizarre anatomical error. But if you place a human being in a functional MRI scanner today and ask them to actively construct a complex lie or to plan a deceptive act, the scan lights up in one specific neurological locus.
The prefrontal cortex.
Exactly, right behind the forehead. This is the brain's ultimate executive center. It is responsible for planning, conscious motivation, moral judgments, and deception.
Wow.
If a person suffers severe trauma to the frontal lobe, they often lose their moral compass and impulse control entirely. The text pinpointed the exact biological center of conscious sin and deception.
It's remarkable, and it even extends to these tiny, deeply relatable details, like fingerprints. Skeptics back then were mocking the text's assertion of physical resurrection, asking how a body could possibly be rebuilt from dust.
Right, standard skepticism.
And the text replies that not only can the bones be rebuilt, but even the very tips of the fingers will be perfectly reconstructed. It elevates the fingertips as the ultimate symbol of intricate human identity. And this is over 1,000 years before science mathematically proved that every single human fingerprint is a unique biological signature.
We also see a profound understanding of preventative mechanisms, like the text highlighting honey as a deep healing agent for humanity. For centuries, people just thought of it as a sweet food.
Just a sweetener, yeah.
But today, clinical wound medicine relies heavily on medical-grade honey. Because of its high osmolarity and slow release of hydrogen peroxide, it is successfully treating deep wounds and superbugs like MRSA that our most advanced synthetic antibiotics actually struggle to defeat.
We've seen how this text maps the physical laws of the universe, which are, rigid and predictable. Gravity does what gravity does. But what happens when a text tries to map the most chaotic, unpredictable force on Earth? Human behavior and geopolitics.
That is a whole different level.
Because it's one thing to describe a star, it's another thing entirely to predict the future of a fallen empire.
And this brings us to the historical dimensions of the text. To really understand this, we have to look at the Byzantine prophecy.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So, the year is 614 AD. The Christian Byzantine Empire, the Romans, have just suffered a catastrophic, crushing defeat by the Persian Empire. The Persians took Jerusalem, and the Roman economy and military completely collapsed. To every contemporary political observer alive at the time, the Roman Empire was just finished.
Right, like if you were placing bets, absolutely no one was betting on the Romans making a comeback.
Not a single person. Yet right in the middle of this despair, the text makes a staggeringly specific prediction. It states that the Romans have been defeated in the lowest land, but they will be victorious within a highly specific window of 3 to 9 years.
Which is such an incredible risk for a text trying to establish credibility. I mean, if year 10 rolls around and the Romans haven't won, your entire message is demonstrably falsifiable. The movement ends right there.
It is the ultimate test of falsifiability. And yet, exactly 7 years later, the Roman Emperor Heraclius launched a brilliant, completely unexpected counteroffensive, struck the heart of Persia, and won. The geopolitical prediction materialized exactly as stated. And a fascinating geographical note here. The text mentions the Romans were defeated in the lowest land. Modern topographic satellite mapping confirms that the Dead Sea Basin, where those decisive early defeats occurred, is literally the lowest point of dry land on the surface of the Earth.
That is just wow. And if we are talking about incredible risks, we have to look at the psychological masterclass of the Abu Lahab paradox.
This is one of my favorite aspects.
It's brilliant. So Abu Lahab was one of the fiercest, most vicious opponents of this message. He dedicated his wealth, his status, everything to destroying it. So an entire chapter is revealed condemning him, stating definitively that he will ruin himself and that he will never, ever believe.
And the paradox is that Abu Lahab lived for nearly 10 more years after that chapter was publicly declared.
10 years of walking around knowing this text publicly said he would never convert.
Exactly. To completely dismantle the religion, to prove the text was a human fabrication, all Abu Lahab had to do was stand up in public and fake a conversion.
He didn't even have to mean it.
No, he just had to say, "I believe." That single hypocritical sentence would have broken the theological logic of the entire movement.
But he didn't do it. He was so trapped by his own psychological wiring, his blinding arrogance and stubbornness, that he couldn't bring himself to take the easiest, most obvious victory in history. The text understood his ego better than he did.
And that profound understanding of structure extends to the architecture of the text itself. This wasn't written down quietly in a study over a weekend. It was spoken aloud, piecemeal, over 23 years, responding to chaotic daily events.
Right.
Yet, if you analyze the semantics, you find perfect mathematical equilibrium. The word for the temporary world and the afterlife both appear exactly 115 times. Angels and demons both appear exactly 88 times.
And it utilizes this incredible oral structure called ring composition, where long chapters are structured in perfectly symmetrical concentric rings. The beginning mirrors the end. The core theme is mathematically dead center. To improvise that verbally over 2 decades is just staggering.
So if we pull all of this together, the astrophysics, the biology, the psychology, the math, we arrive back at the very dilemma we started with today.
The search for meaning.
Exactly. Why are all these profound scientific and historical alignments present in an ancient text? For a modern, rational, highly skeptical person, it is very difficult to just blindly believe. We have massive intellectual walls built up.
We do?
So these scientific verifications serve an existential purpose. They act as a key, designed to gently lower your intellectual defenses.
Because when you realize that this highly intricate alignment cannot simply be a series of lucky guesses, it does something really profound. Your rational mind finally gives your heart permission to relax.
Yes.
It allows you to entertain the idea that the universe isn't arbitrary.
Exactly. Science brilliantly answers the how. But this kind of deep, cohesive wisdom offers us the why. It suggests that you are not a random biological anomaly on a floating rock. The universe is incredibly deliberately engineered. And by extension, your own life has a profound intentional purpose.
And that's what this deep dive is really about. It's not about forcing a belief system on you. It's about looking at the overwhelming interlocking beauty of reality and allowing yourself to step out of that cold, nihilistic mindset. It's about letting your intellect guide your heart toward a real sense of peace.
Because knowledge is only truly valuable when it transforms how you view your own existence. The signs of a deeply ordered universe are everywhere. From the unseen waves in the deepest oceans to the neural pathways lighting up in your own mind.
So as we wrap up today, we want to leave you with one concrete thought to carry with you. The next time you walk outside and look up at the vastness of the stars at night, or, even if you just look down right now at the incredibly unique, intricate ridges of your own fingerprint, how will you choose to interpret this beautifully designed code for your own life?